Late dry season, northern savanna of Serengeti. The last storms have long since passed, leaving the land a color of ash and old bone. Dust drifts in low veils across the plain, lifting at each hesitant breath of wind. Acacia shadows lie thin and broken on the ground. In the distance, a column of vultures circles without urgency, as if time itself is slowed under the heat. Among the scattered tower giraffes, one calf stands apart. Its movements are deliberate, restrained by something not immediately visible from afar. As the herd shifts, the cause becomes clear. A dark, irregular mass clings to the young animal's neck, just below the jaw, alive with faint, restless motion. Hornets rise and settle in a constant orbit, their bodies flashing amber in the hard light. Each shake of the calf's head triggers a brief storm of wings, then a return to the same living collar. The mother remains close but cannot intervene. She lowers her head, watching, ears pivoting toward every sound carried on the wind. The distant whoop of hyenas, the soft padding of something unseen moving through grass too dry to conceal much. The calf does not lie down. It cannot risk the vulnerability. Here, endurance becomes the only defense, measured not in strength, but in hours survived under a cloud of pain. On the open plains of the Serengeti and across much of eastern and southern Africa, the giraffe, exists as both giant and target. It is the tallest land animal on Earth, an evolutionary outcome shaped by millions of years of competition for food beyond the reach of other herbivores. Its height grants access to the upper canopy of acacia trees, where protein-rich leaves grow behind the fences of thorns and toxins. A prehensile tongue, thickened saliva, and specialized digestive system allow it to harvest what others cannot. Yet, this vertical advantage comes at a cost. The newborn calf, dropped from a height of nearly 2 meters at birth, enters the world already exposed, already visible, already vulnerable. Giraffe calves spend their first weeks hidden when possible, lying motionless in grass while their mothers forage within sight. This strategy reduces detection by predators such as lions, hyenas, and leopards, which preferentially target the young. Mortality in the first year can exceed 50% in some regions, making early survival the most critical threshold in a giraffe's life. Those that endure must rapidly learn to stand, run, and interpret the subtle alarm cues of the herd. Shifts in posture, silence where there was feeding, the orientation of many ears toward a single point on the horizon. The savanna ecosystem surrounding them is defined by cycles of abundance and scarcity. Seasonal rains drive the growth of grasses and the migrations of herbivores, which in turn sustain predators. During the dry season, water contracts into isolated sources, concentrating animals and intensifying competition. Parasites flourish in these conditions, as do insects that exploit weakened hosts. Among them are social wasps and hornets, opportunistic builders that anchor paper nests to branches, cliffs, and occasionally moving surfaces if conditions allow. While large mammals typically dislodge such attachments through rubbing or rolling, a giraffe's anatomy limits these options. Its neck, elongated by the stretching of cervical vertebrae rather than an increase in their number, cannot easily reach most of its own body. Grooming relies on mutual contact with herd members or environmental structures positioned at the right height, resources not always available on open ground. Research observations across African reserves have documented how external stressors compound vulnerability in young giraffes. Injuries, entanglements, or heavy parasite loads alter movement patterns, reducing feeding efficiency and slowing escape responses. Predators are highly attuned to such deviations. Lions, particularly, select individuals that lag, stumble, or separate from the group. Hyenas, operating through endurance rather than explosive speed, shadow herds for hours, waiting for signs of fatigue. Even vultures, though not hunters, function as indicators in this network of surveillance, their descending circles revealing weakness long before death occurs. Despite their size, giraffes are not territorial in the strict sense. They move across overlapping home ranges shaped by vegetation patterns rather than defended borders. Social bonds are fluid. Females with calves form loose nursery groups, gaining safety through numbers while retaining the ability to disperse when resources thin. Males drift between these clusters, their dominance hierarchies established through ritualized necking contests rather than lethal combat. Within this system, the survival of a single calf is statistically fragile but ecologically significant. Each represents years of maternal investment and the slow reproductive pace characteristic of large herbivores. The presence of an abnormal burden, such as a persistent swarm of stinging insects anchored to skin, introduces a rare but severe challenge. Repeated stings can cause localized swelling, infection, dehydration from stress, and disruption of normal feeding. More critically, the constant agitation interferes with vigilance. A calf preoccupied with pain cannot maintain the steady scanning behavior that detects approaching danger. Its mother, though attentive, must also feed to sustain milk production, creating unavoidable moments when protection lapses. In the arithmetic of Savanna, weakness is never isolated. It propagates outward, altering behavior of predators, scavengers, and even competing herbivores. What begins as a small ecological accident can ripple into a focal point for multiple species, each responding according to instinct rather than intention. Here, survival is not determined by cruelty or mercy, but by the accumulation of advantages measured in seconds of speed, degrees of awareness, and the simple capacity to endure longer than whatever waits nearby. The vulnerability of a giraffe calf is not merely a matter of size, but of physiology and developmental timing. At birth, a calf weighs around 50 to 70 kilograms and can stand within an hour, an adaptation shaped by relentless predation pressure. Yet coordination lags behind capability. Muscles strengthen over weeks, and the neural pathways governing balance and rapid directional change are still refining. In these early months, calves rely heavily on proximity to their mothers, whose height provides both surveillance and a formidable defensive weapon. An adult giraffe's kick, delivered with precise forward or lateral force, is capable of killing a lion. Predators understand this risk. They target separation, confusion, and terrain that disrupts the mother's ability to intervene. The African savanna is not a uniform grassland, but a mosaic of microhabitats. Open plains, thorn scrub, dry riverbeds, and scattered woodland. Each zone carries different acoustic and visual properties. Sound travels farther over short grass, while thicker vegetation conceals approach at the cost of reduced visibility. For giraffes, whose survival depends on early detection, open ground is usually preferred. However, during the dry season, edible browse becomes patchy, forcing herds into less optimal terrain. In such places, insects proliferate in stagnant water pockets and decaying organic matter. Social wasps and hornets, though primarily insect predators themselves, defend their colonies aggressively against perceived threats. A nest affixed to a mobile host creates a paradox. The structure remains intact as long as the host does not directly dislodge it, while the host endures continuous defensive attacks triggered by its own movement. Field reports from wildlife biologists note that large mammals occasionally carry accidental passengers. Clusters of ticks, botfly larvae beneath the skin, or birds such as oxpeckers feeding on parasites. Most of these relationships are either parasitic or mutualistic, but a stinging insect colony represents a purely antagonistic burden. Unlike ticks, which feed quietly, hornets advertise their presence through constant motion and chemical alarm signals. Each disturbance releases pheromones that recruit more defenders, escalating the response. For a giraffe calf, whose skin is thinner than that of an adult, repeated envenomation can produce systemic stress responses, elevated heart rate, suppressed feeding, and disrupted sleep cycles. Over days, energy reserves decline, and dehydration becomes a risk if the animal avoids water sources where agitation might provoke further attacks. Predators interpret such physiological decline through behavior rather than scent alone. Lions observe posture, a lowered head, uneven gait, delayed reaction when the herd moves. Hyenas test boundaries, approaching incrementally to measure flight distance. Even opportunistic species like jackals monitor the periphery, ready to exploit any collapse. This process can unfold over days, a slow tightening of attention rather than an immediate strike. In ecosystems governed by energy conservation, predators prefer certainty over risk. An injured or compromised prey animal represents a calculation already leaning in their favor. Yet the presence of the mother alters this equation. Female giraffes exhibit persistent defensive behavior, positioning themselves between threat and offspring, maintaining visual contact, and using height to detect danger beyond the calves' field of view. Studies using GPS tracking and direct observation have shown that mothers of vulnerable calves reduce their own foraging efficiency, sacrificing intake to maintain proximity. This trade-off underscores a fundamental tension in herbivore life histories: the need to feed continuously versus the need to protect young in a landscape where food distribution dictates movement. Ecologically, such episodes illustrate the interconnected pressures shaping survival. Climate variability influences vegetation. Vegetation patterns influence herbivore distribution. Herbivore distribution shapes predator strategy. Insect populations respond to moisture and temperature, inserting another layer into this chain. No single factor operates in isolation. The calve's suffering, while immediate and visible, is the surface expression of deeper environmental dynamics: drought cycles, habitat structure, evolutionary constraints on anatomy, and the ever-present calculus of predation. For the herd, time becomes a decisive element. If the calf can endure until the nest deteriorates, falls away, or is removed through contact with vegetation, the balance may shift back toward recovery. If not, the weakening trajectory will eventually intersect with the patience of predators that have been watching, waiting for the moment when vigilance falters and the immense height of the giraffe no longer translates into safety. Survival in a giraffe calf begins as a negotiation between anatomy and circumstance. Height, the defining trait of the species, is both shield and exposure. From above, the calf can see farther than most animals on the plain, yet it is also visible from great distances, a pale silhouette against muted grass. When burdened by constant pain, its posture changes subtly. The neck, normally held in fluid alignment, stiffens. Movements become economical, each step measured to avoid provoking a cloud of stinging insects gathered at its throat. Energy that should support growth is diverted into stress responses, elevated cortisol levels, accelerated breathing, the quiet depletion of reserves needed for rapid escape. In young ungulates, endurance is rarely about strength alone. It is about maintaining the baseline functions: feeding, hydration, sleep, that allow the body to remain ready for sudden flight. Disruption to any one of these can cascade into systemic weakness. On the savanna, predators are not required to overpower healthy prey. They wait for the body to undermine itself. Defense strategies among giraffes rely on awareness rather than concealment. Unlike smaller antelope that vanish into brush, giraffes persist through detection and deterrence. Adults form loose spatial arrangements that maximize fields of view, their elevated heads scanning in overlapping arcs. A calf normally occupies the center of this configuration. When it drifts outward, slowed by discomfort or distraction, the geometry collapses. Lions exploit these fractures, approaching low and against the wind, closing the distance until a short explosive charge can isolate the target. Hyenas, lacking the same burst speed, apply pressure over time, forcing repeated movement until fatigue accumulates. For a calf unable to settle or lie down comfortably, rest becomes fragmented, compounding exhaustion. Observational studies of predator-prey encounters show that even minor impairments in reaction time can determine the outcome. A delay of seconds is often enough. Instinct governs much of the calf's response. There is no learned strategy for dislodging a persistent swarm attached beyond reach. Instead, behavior reverts to fundamental patterns: staying close to mother, aligning with the herd's direction of movement, freezing when uncertainty peaks. The mother, in turn, modulates her pace, sometimes halting the group entirely to keep the calf within protective range. Such pauses increase exposure to predators that monitor herd movements from afar. In this way, the suffering of one individual alters the risk profile of many. Nature distributes consequences broadly without intent. Within the broader ecosystem, the situation illustrates the neutrality of survival dynamics. Hornets defend a colony because that behavior ensures genetic continuity. Predators wait because patience conserves energy and reduces injury risk. The giraffes endure because endurance is the only option available. No participant acts with malice or compassion. Each follows a path shaped by evolutionary pressures older than the landscape itself. The drama perceived by human observers is, in biological terms, a convergence of needs: food, defense, reproduction, intersecting at a single vulnerable point on the open plain. Another angle emerges through the lens of maternal investment. one of the most demanding strategies in large mammals. A female giraffe produces a single calf after a gestation of about 15 months, an extended commitment that limits how often she can reproduce. This makes each offspring disproportionately valuable to her genetic future. In the presence of persistent threat, mothers have been observed maintaining near constant vigilance, even at the cost of their own nutritional intake. For a lactating female, this trade-off is severe. Milk production requires substantial energy and water, resources already scarce in the dry season. As her condition declines, so too does the quality and quantity of nourishment available to the calf. The bond is therefore both protective and fragile, a feedback loop where the weakening of one endangers the other. When the calf cannot rest due to continual irritation and pain, it feeds less efficiently, pressing the mother to compensate with longer foraging bouts that momentarily increase separation risk. A further perspective lies in the role of opportunistic predators that do not initiate the crisis, but are drawn toward its progression. Spotted hyenas, among the most adaptable carnivores in Africa, operate through a system of information exchange, vocalizations that can travel several kilometers across open ground. A single clan detecting abnormal behavior in a herd may converge silently over hours, assembling a loose perimeter that tests the giraffe's defenses from multiple directions. Unlike lions, which rely on coordinated ambush, hyenas probe for weakness through persistence, forcing movement and observing which individual falters first. Their jaws, capable of crushing bone, allow them to exploit carcasses at stages others cannot, making patience a viable strategy. Vultures overhead add another layer, their circling patterns acting as visual signals to predators below that something unusual is unfolding. In this network of watchers, the calf becomes a focal point long before any attack begins. There is also the perspective of environmental constraint. The savanna's openness offers few physical structures that can help dislodge a nest attached high on the neck. Trees with suitable branch angles are sparse, and steep terrain is largely absent. Rolling on the ground, a behavior used by some mammals to remove parasites, is risky for a giraffe due to the difficulty of rising quickly from a prone position. Adults seldom attempt it unless conditions are exceptionally safe. For a calf already attracting attention, such vulnerability could be fatal. Thus, the landscape itself limits the available solutions, reinforcing the endurance strategy despite its costs. Finally, the situation reflects the broader principle of moral neutrality in natural systems. Suffering occurs without purpose beyond the immediate biological consequences it produces. The hornets defend, the predators wait, the mother guards, and the calf endures, not as characters in narrative, but as organisms responding to stimuli. Over evolutionary time, countless similar incidents have shaped behaviors and tolerances, selecting for those able to survive unpredictable burdens. In this sense, the episode is both singular and ordinary, a small event within a continuum that governs population dynamics across generations. By the fourth day, the balance begins to shift. The calves' movement slow to a careful, wavering rhythm, each step placed as if the ground itself might provoke another surge of stings. The herd has reduced its pace to accommodate it, but the distance between individuals has grown uneven, a subtle unraveling of protective formation. Heat shimmers above the plain, blurring outlines, compressing depth. In that distortion, shapes move that are not part of the herd. A pride of lions has been following since dawn, keeping low in the sparse cover of brittle grass and shallow depressions where rainwater once pooled. Their approach is methodical, guided by wind direction and the predictable path of thirsty herbivores toward a diminishing water source. They do not rush. The adult giraffes are formidable opponents, capable of crushing bone with a single strike, and the lion's concert energy for precise moment when risk is lowest. Their focus narrows on the calf, not because of cruelty, but because deviation from normal gait has marked it as the most attainable target. The mother senses the shift before the others. Her head rises abruptly, nostrils flaring, ears locking forward. She steps between the approaching scent and her offspring, placing her body as a vertical barrier. Around her, other females orient in the same direction, a silent alignment that transforms scattered individuals into a defensive line. The calf remains just behind her forelegs, trembling, the dark mass at its neck erupting into agitation as its rapid breathing disturbs a nest. Hornets surge outward in a dense halo, then settle again, a living storm tethered to fragile skin. The lions advance in increments, pausing whenever the giraffes face them directly. This standoff can last hours. Predators measure fatigue. Prey measure distance. Under the weight of pain and dehydration, the calf's endurance falters first. It attempts to lie down, then stops halfway, unsure, exposed. The mother nudges it upright, but the effort drains her as well. Each minute erodes a margin that has kept the pride at bay. When the wind shifts, carrying the center giraffe away from the lions, the lead lioness lowers herself into a near crawl and closes the gap with sudden acceleration. The defensive line fractures as adults pivot to deliver kicks, hooves slicing the air with lethal force. Dust erupts, obscuring forms into silhouettes of motion and impact. In the chaos, the calf tries to follow its mother but stumbles, its coordination compromised by exhaustion and the relentless assault at its throat. This is the moment predators have calculated. Not an overpowering of strength, but the collapse of resilience. The outcome will be decided in seconds measured against days of attrition, a convergence of hunger, pain, and the unforgiving arithmetic of survival on an open plain where there is nowhere left to retreat. The lioness commits fully now, launching from the dust with a burst of speed refined through countless hunts. Her trajectory is not toward the mother, that risk remains too great, but toward the faltering space just behind her, where the calf's path has become uncertain. Another lioness arcs wide to intercept any attempt at escape, while a subadult male lingers back, ready to reinforce if the adults succeed. Coordination emerges without signal, an inherited choreography triggered by opportunity. The mother pivots, delivering a backward kick that strikes the ground with explosive force, sending a shock through the soil. The lioness swerves, narrowly avoiding the blow that could shatter her skull. For an instant, predator and prey occupy the same narrow corridor of danger, each relying on reflex shaped by evolutionary memory. The calf bolts forward, driven by panic rather than direction, the hornet swarm erupting violently as the sudden motion tears at the nest's fragile attachment. Stinging insects scatter into the air in a dense cloud, disoriented, their defensive formation broken for the first time since the ordeal began. Pain intensifies before it fades. With the nest partially dislodged, hornets lose their anchor, some clinging to the calf's skin, others drifting aimlessly before returning to the damaged structure now hanging at an angle. The calf's stride lengthens in that brief window, freed from the concentrated weight that had pulled at its neck. It veers toward the cluster of adults, instinctively seeking the geometry of safety restored by numbers. The mother closes a distance in long, ground-eating steps, positioning herself once more between her offspring and the attackers. The lions hesitate. Their charge has lost cohesion amid the sudden storm of hooves and the unexpected disruption of the hornet's defensive cloud, which now disperses unpredictably through the air. A few insects strike the nearest lioness, provoking a reflexive shake of her head and a momentary withdrawal. Lions are not adapted to endure repeated stings around the face and eyes. The cost of injury can outweigh the value of a single kill. The pride regroups at a cautious distance, reassessing the risk as the giraffes tighten their formation and begin to move away in a unified column. Dust settles slowly behind the retreating herd. The calf remains upright, though its gait is uneven, its flanks heaving. The torn remnant of the nest swings loosely, no longer a living collar, but not yet gone. Overhead, vultures adjust their circles, widening again as the immediate prospect of a carcass diminishes. The lions watch until the giraffes become elongated shapes against the pale horizon, then turn back toward the shade where energy can be conserved for another attempt, another day, another calculation. In the savanna, resolution is rarely absolute. Survival often arrives not as triumph, but as a temporary reprieve purchased by chance alignments, a shift of wind, a misjudged step, the structural weakness of something as small as a paper nest. The calf has endured the convergence of forces that might have ended its life, yet the outcome remains provisional, dependent on recovery that must now occur under the same relentless conditions that nearly claimed it. In the days that follow, the herd alters its movements in subtle but measurable ways. Instead of crossing the most exposed stretches of plain at midday, they travel during the cooler margins of morning and late afternoon, when heat distortion is reduced and scents carry more predictably on the air. The mother keeps the calf position on the inner side of the group, using the bodies of other females as a living barrier. Such formations have been documented in long-term field studies of giraffe social dynamics, particularly when a vulnerable juvenile is present. Protection emerges not from coordinated intention, but from shared sensitivity to risk, each individual adjusting spacing according to tension perceives in others. The remnant of the nest dries and loosens as hours pass. Without the continuous maintenance of the colony, its paper walls become brittle, flaking away in the wind. Eventually, while the herd feeds among scattered acacias, the fragment catches on a forked branch and tears free. The calf startles at the sudden release, stepping sideways with a reflex born of days of irritation. For the first time since the ordeal began, it lowers its head without agitation, testing the absence of weight and movement along its throat. Small welts remain beneath the fur, some already scabbed, others swollen but fading. Insects that once orbited in constant defense disperse into the open air, their colony irreversibly broken. Physiological recovery, however, is not immediate. The calf's muscles show signs of depletion from prolonged stress and interrupted feeding. It drinks frequently when water is available, compensating for dehydration accumulated over days of heightened respiration and limited rest. Observational research on large herbivores indicates that such recovery periods are critical. Individuals that survive acute stress events may still succumb later if weakened condition reduces their ability to evade future threats. The mother's vigilance does not diminish. She inspects the calf repeatedly, lowering her head to scent its skin, a behavior associated with recognition and assessment rather than grooming. Predators remain present at the periphery of this recovery. Lions that failed in the initial attempt continue to monitor from a distance, recalculating as the calf's gait gradually steadies. Hyenas approach under cover darkness, their calls carrying across the plain, testing whether fatigue will isolate the young giraffe once more. Yet as strength returns, the herd's confidence subtly reasserts itself. Feeding intervals lengthen. Movement becomes less constrained. The calf begins to mirror the behavior of other juveniles, nibbling leaves experimentally, lifting its head to scan in imitation of adults. Ecologically, the event leaves faint traces rather than dramatic change. No carcass enriches the soil, no predator gains a decisive advantage. Yet energy has shifted through the system in less visible ways. Time spent watching instead of hunting, distance traveled in altered patterns, water consumed to restore equilibrium. Such ripples are typical of survival without fatality. They illustrate how even non-lethal encounters shape the distribution and behavior of species across a landscape governed by scarcity. As evening light softens the contours of savanna, the calf stands beneath its mother's shadow, no longer isolated by a living burden, but still marked by the memory encoded in its nervous system. A learned association between sudden discomfort and unseen danger. In prey animals, memory is not reflective but functional, sharpening responses to future anomalies. What nearly ended its life now becomes part of the silent knowledge that will guide every step it takes across an environment where safety is always provisional. Night brings a different calculus of survival. Under the cooling air and diffuse starlight of the Serengeti, visibility collapses into silhouettes and sound becomes a primary sense. The herd tightens instinctively, adults forming a loose ring as calves occupy the interior space where threats are harder to isolate. The young giraffe, though weakened, remains standing. Giraffes rarely lie down for long, and juveniles in particular avoid the vulnerability of rising slowly in darkness. Its breathing is steadied, but fatigue lingers in the tremor of its legs. Hyenas approach first, their padded steps nearly silent on the dust-hardened ground. They do not rush. Instead, they circle at the edge of scent, reading the herd's tension through posture and orientation. Research on hyena hunting behavior shows that many attempts end without contact, abandoned when prey cohesion appears too strong. Tonight, the giraffes hold their formation. Several adults face outward simultaneously, ears rotating, hooves poised. The calf presses close to its mother's flank, shielded by height and vigilance rather than concealment. By dawn, the hyenas withdraw, conserving energy for more promising opportunities elsewhere. The calf has survived the most dangerous interval, the hours when predators exploit darkness and fatigue. In the days that follow, its appetite returns with urgency. It feeds alongside other juveniles, selecting tender leaves within reach, gradually rebuilding muscle and hydration reserves. Field observations indicate that young giraffes can compensate for short-term nutritional deficits if access to browse improves, their growth rate accelerating once stress subsides. Scars remain as faint, hairless patches along the neck, visible only at close range. Such marks carry no symbolic meaning in the animal world. They are simply tissue repaired after injury, yet they alter the texture of the skin, perhaps increasing sensitivity, perhaps serving as a physical reminder that influences future behavior. The mother's protectiveness eases incrementally as the calf's movements regain fluidity. She resumes longer foraging arcs, trusting the herd's collective awareness to substitute for constant proximity. For the predators, the episode fades into a pattern repeated across seasons. Attempts made, opportunities lost, energy budgets recalculated. Lions will hunt again. Hyenas will test other herds. Vultures will follow thermals in search of the next signal of weakness. The savanna resets without ceremony. Survival does not grant immunity, only the continuation of exposure to the same forces that nearly prevailed. Months later, the calf will stand taller, its proportions lengthening toward the improbable architecture of adulthood. The memory of pain will not exist as narrative, only as sharpened reflex, a quicker startle at sudden movement near the neck, a learned intolerance for persistent irritation. In this way, suffering becomes adaptation, translated into behavior that marginally improves the odds of reaching maturity. Across the landscape, countless similar struggles unfold beyond observation, most ending without witness. The endurance of the single calf does not alter the system, yet it affirms the principle that defines life here. Survival is cumulative, built from moments when vulnerability does not quite align with opportunity for those who would exploit it. The plains settle into quiet again, dust and heat softened by the fading day. The calf stands beneath its mother, no longer burdened by the swarm that once encircled its neck, yet still marked by the lingering traces of struggle. In the grand ledger of the savanna, this episode is but one of countless interactions where endurance meets opportunity. Nature does not pause to commend bravery, nor does it punish suffering with intent. It moves according to the immutable rules of energy, risk, and adaptation. Here, survival is neither heroic nor cruel. It is measured in seconds of vigilance, hours of sustained movement, and the slow restoration of function after disruption. The giraffe calves ordeal, hornets clinging, predators waiting, heat and dehydration pressing, underscores a simple principle. Life persists only by enduring the convergence of forces aligned against it. Each scar, each learned reflex, is a quiet record of a system operating without morality, but with perfect consistency. In observing such events, one perceives the indifferent precision of the wild. Balance is maintained not by design, but by the cumulative effect of countless interactions, each shaped by instinct, physiology, and circumstance. The calf survives, the mother continues her endless vigilance, and the predators resume their cycles of pursuit. Life flows onward, unrelenting, impartial, and beautifully exact in its demands. From this, the savanna offers its enduring lesson. Existence is neither reward nor punishment, but a measure of resilience, endurance, and the ceaseless negotiation between vulnerability and the forces